You're listening to Jordanville Readings, a podcast of Holy Trinity Publications, located at Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville, New York. Today's reading is from Renewing Gender, an Orthodox Perspective, by Dr. Jean-Claude Larchet. The prayers of our Holy Fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us. Amen. Chapter 1. The Definition and Roots of Gender Theory. Definition. Over the last 10 years, gender has become one of the main preoccupations of our age. The philosophical developments it requires have led to much debate, but, more importantly, it has consequences for society in modern mentalities and institutions, especially in medicine, law, and education. Gender theory has been widely criticized, but those who promote and defend it have rarely faced up to these objections. Instead, they simply say that such a theory does not exist, and never has. This bold denial and refusal to engage with criticism are signs of laziness and bad faith. Doubtless, it also reveals unease at the pertinence of certain objections. Moreover, it seeks to avoid the connotations of a theory, a hypothetical intellectual construct which is both fragile and uncertain, falsifiable, and replaceable. The partisans of gender theory prefer to speak of gender studies. The word studies sounds serious and learned and suggests roots in the universities. Using the plural rightly shows that a unified theory of gender does not exist, just many ideas. They are inspired by different sources and sometimes clash. However, they are all the same at the root, and differ only in secondary matters. It is unreasonable to deny the existence of a gender theory, since over the last few years, so many books and articles have appeared which promote its principles. It is noteworthy that one of the founders of gender theory, Judith Butler, who is also probably its main promoter, regularly uses the term gender theory. So, there are many reasons to consider that it is legitimate to speak of gender theory, provided due weight is given to the various nuances adopted by its various promoters. Throughout the history of humanity up till now, in every civilization and society, humanity has been seen as divided into two genders, masculine and feminine, with their special characters, as are most of the animals. These two genders are based on the biological difference between the male and female sexes, naturally linked to them and continuous with them. Gender theory affirms that there is no essential or natural relation between sex and gender apart from what is subjectively imposed by society as a whole or by individuals. The relationship between them is, at the root, purely social or cultural and has nothing to do with the body and its objective sexual attributes. It is artificial, contrived, and so relative, like all other cultural constructs. From this foundation, gender theoreticians start by saying that these relationships should be undone, or deconstructed, by destroying the social stereotypes on which they are based, for these lead to inequality and discrimination. Such inequality is always in favor of men, and their victims are always women. They base this idea on a system, the patriarchy, which they seek to destroy. On another level, gender theoreticians have differing views. Some of them state that between masculine and feminine there is a spectrum of genders. Others affirm that there is a third gender, neutral, where those who feel themselves neither man nor woman can be placed along with those who feel they are both at once, either a mixture of the two, or alternating between the two. Others preach purely and simply the abolition of gender to avoid the duality that results from referring one to the other. For them, sex has no objective reality. It is simply a representation which is completely dependent on the representation of gender. Some of them use a formula which recalls the existentialist formula: existence precedes essence, and affirm that gender precedes sex, or the representation of gender precedes the representation of sex. Then, if one were to destroy the representation of gender, the representation of sex would vanish along with sex itself. As a result, all of them believe that individuals, once freed from all sexual social conditioning, can freely, as they wish, determine their gender independently of their biological sex and its physiological characteristics to suit their desires, their preferences, and their phantasms. Someone endowed with the masculine sex, both biologically and physiologically, is free to see himself as becoming feminine and to live accordingly. Someone as the feminine sex is free to see herself as masculine and to live accordingly. Both may also choose to see themselves as embodying two genders at once, or alternatively, as having no gender at all. This is not a question of nature, but of individual choice, not of the body's biological and physiological constitution and its appearance, but of self-consciousness and self-representation. Biological sex is of no significance or importance, and nor is the body. The important thing is the gender which one chooses for oneself, or which one refuses to choose in one's own individual consciousness. Some gender theorists accept the different genders, recognizing two or more, but consider that they can be changed at will. Since gender has no root in nature, each individual may enjoy any identity, any sex, and every sexual orientation. Eric Fossen, who translated Judith Butler and introduced gender theory to France, writes thus: "The transvestite is everyone's true self." Society assigns a gender to each of its members as a function of each one's biological sex, and assigns the role that goes with it. This is replaced by the roles of one or more genders independent of biological sex, defined and chosen by each individual. Other gender theorists deny that there is any variety in gender and preach a humanity without gender, identifying with the universal. One can see that gender theory takes many forms, but all start from the same hard core: the theory that there is no continuity or natural relationship between gender and sex. They are disconnected. So are culture and nature. So are the free orientation of the individual and cultural conditioning. On the practical level, this is expressed in the project of deconstructing the social archetypes of masculine and feminine through political and social militancy. The aim is to reform society so as to set up, under the cloak of equality, a blurring at every level of the differences between man and woman. Their sexual identity is supposed to allow their attributes to be completely interchangeable. The diversity of gender theory and its inner unity are explained by its history. Origins and development of gender theory. Four main stages can be distinguished in the development of gender theory. A. The analysis of pathologies during the years 1950 to 1960. The first distinction between sex and gender dates from 1955. It is due to the American psychologist John Money, who lived from 1921 to 2006. He studied the clinical case histories of subjects presenting biological characteristics from both sexes. At the time, they were called hermaphrodites, but today they are called intersexuals. He distinguished sexual identity, which is biological, from gender identity, and the gender role through which it is expressed. This corresponds to each individual's subjective perception and to their social experience of masculinity and femininity. According to Money, this perception and the experience that goes with it are determined by society through education and the cultural environment. He saw a confirmation of his theory in the clinical study conducted by the psychiatrists Joan and John Hampton of 5,000 hermaphrodites, and went on to apply it to help children, whose birth sex was indeterminate, to extract themselves from this sexual ambiguity. It was a social handicap which he sought to overcome by asking the parents to decide which sex the child should have. He would then prescribe appropriate surgical and hormonal treatments, whilst the parents were to bring up the child in accord with what was normal for the chosen sex. By emphasizing the second part, he affirmed that social conditioning was determinant of gender identity and the gender role assumed by individuals. Another pioneer in this field is the American psychiatrist Robert Stoller, who founded the Gender Identity Research Clinic. Its purpose was to research human sexuality, and it paid special attention to transgender people, those who felt they belonged to the other sex. Stoller used the idea of gender to indicate the sentiment of sexual identity, as opposed to sex, which biologically determines the difference between masculine and feminine. B. The philosophical developments of the years 1960 to 1970. During the years 1960 to 1970, a philosophy of gender was developed on three levels. 1. Existentialism affirms that the free subject is prior to his nature or essence. A man is not defined a priori by an essence, or a nature imposed on him by necessity. Instead, he defines himself during the course of his life, an idea summed up by the famous formula of Sartre: existence precedes essence. When applied to sex and gender, this idea implies that anyone may choose a gender independent of sex, which comes from biological nature. Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre's partner, shared his existentialist philosophy. She was a pioneer of feminism and defended this idea. Her famous formula, which may also be applied to men, "One is not born a woman, one becomes one," is nonetheless ambiguous. Denying the natural property by which gender may be defined implies that it may be determined by individual choice. But it also implies that it may often arise from the influences of life in society, especially education in the family and in schools. This should be seen as relative and should be challenged so as to arrive at some other choice, which brings us back to the original meaning. 2. Marxism was very fashionable at that time in intellectual circles, and several leading feminists, such as Monique Wittig and Christine Delphi, adopted its ideas. They thought of the relationships between man and woman in terms of class struggle, the revolt of the oppressed, women, against the oppressors, men. The final victory of women could lead to a classless society. 3. French theory, the name given in the United States to so-called postmodern philosophy, was developed by Derrida, Foucault, Deleuze, and Guattari, Bourdieu, and Baudrillard. This movement was very successful in the United States. Its main founder was Derrida, strongly influenced by Sartre, who also had a great influence on Judith Butler, the main pioneer and promoter of gender theory. French theory is not the unified and coherent system that its name would imply. However, the philosophers who represent it have 2 points in common, which, from the start, influenced gender theory and radical feminism. 1. They give pride of place to the rejection of norms, values, and the universal principles in every domain. And 2. They believe that everything in society has a binary structure arising from the language and thought which underpins it. It reflects and justifies the couple in relationships of dominance to the dominated. To put an end to the rule of the dominant, this binary structure must be deconstructed and eliminated. For instance, men and women, heterosexual and allosexual. They refer to their own thought as postmodern, which is fundamentally characterized by deconstructivism. C. Radical feminism. Radical feminism, as opposed to moderate feminism, is without doubt the movement which has done the most to impose gender theory. Both kinds of feminism agree that most societies are inegalitarian, placing men over women as regards power, status, and their social role. The women are in a state of inferiority and submission. Moderate feminism, the earliest to develop, seeks to bring the social conditions of men and women closer together. It aims to grant women the same rights in society as men, political and economic, the same status and the same treatment. It also seeks to alter private life so that tasks that were once the preserve of women, housework and raising children, should be shared. But though it did question the way certain attributes could be assigned to a particular sex, it did not question the duality of gender. Nor did it question the link of gender to biological sex, which led to it being called inclusive feminism. Radical or extremist feminism appeared later to challenge the link between gender and sex. It also aimed at equality, but of a different kind. Genders had to be interchangeable as regards sexual identity. The duality of genders is abolished, for it is seen as having no natural reason, but as resting instead on a purely cultural or social construct which systematically seeks the advantage of men over women. This construct is called the patriarchy. This concept draws on 2 ideas. There is French theory, which considers that the relations between men and women are of domination. This is seen as systematic and systemic, a whole social system where males dominate females. There is also Marxism, which was so fashionable amongst intellectuals at that time. It provided the concepts from which several important feminists developed their thought. Monique Wittig and Christine Delphi are examples. They viewed the relations between men and women in terms of class struggle. The oppressed class, women, rebelled against the oppressors, men, and the final victory of this rebellion would lead to a classless society. The 2 influences are linked, since some of the proponents of French theory, especially Bourdieu, were themselves strongly influenced by Marxism. Based on this analysis, radical feminism seeks the destruction of all social structures, marriage, the family, education, etc., which establish and perpetuate a difference between men and women and preserve this duality. It sees both sides of the duality as a source of inequality. In its most extreme form, it excludes men with hatred, misandry, and violence, verbal at the very least. This is why it is called exclusive feminism, one which excludes. Radical feminism arose in the English-speaking world around the end of the 1960s and was then imported into France. Among its most notable theoreticians are Judith Butler, Anne Fausto Sterling, Monique Wittig, Catherine A. McKinnon, and Christine Delphi. They show quite a variety of approaches both in their ideological roots and in their particular aims and commitments. Nonetheless, they all agree on the content of the hardcore of gender theory. D. The LGBTQIA+ movement. Gender theory went on to be exploded by the LGBT movement, now known as the LGBTQIA+ movement, a title which includes all the main sexual orientations apart from heterosexuality: lesbians, female homosexuals, gays, male homosexuals, bisexuals, those who have a different sexual orientation, transsexuals, those who have changed sex by surgery or hormone treatment, transgenders, those who believe that they have a gender which does not correspond to their sex, queers, or genderqueers, those who feel that they do not belong to any sex or gender. They are also called non-binary. Intersexuals, those who are born with neither masculine nor feminine sex. Asexuals, those who feel no need to engage in sexual relations. Some of them are represented in France by the Association for Asexual Visibility. The sign plus means that other categories may be added to allow for other sexual orientations. In the United States, the title is longer: LGBTQQIAAPO+. It signifies lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, queer, questioning, those who are not sure about their gender, intersex, asexual, allies, heterosexual allies of one or more of these groups, pansexuals, those who are attracted sexually to every gender, other, all the rest. But around 50 other denominations may be added. Since 2014, these have been offered as options, alternative to masculine and feminine, to those registered on Facebook. We present them here in English for they are almost exclusively used in the English-speaking world. Agender, those who identify themselves as genderless. Androgyne, androgynous, those who claim a gender identity in between masculine and feminine, neither man nor woman. Bigender, those who claim two genders or more. Trigender. Cis or cisgender, those who live by the gender corresponding to their birth sex. They largely correspond to the heteronormative genders. Cis is opposed to transsexual and cisgender to transgender. Cis male, cis man, cisgender male, cisgender man. A man with a masculine gender identity. Cis female, cis woman, cisgender female, cisgender woman. A woman with a feminine gender identity. Female to male. A trans individual, trans in the sense girl to boy or woman to man, but who may be partway between the two genders and not necessarily entirely male gender. FTM, an abbreviation of the above which has the advantage of not naming the two genders, masculine and feminine. Gender fluid, someone with fluid or multiple genders which crosses the frontier between masculine and feminine. Gender nonconforming, those who refuse to conform to the gender given them at birth and to the norms of sex and gender imposed by their social and cultural environment. Gender questioning, the undecided, who question their relationship with sex and gender. Gender variant, those who express their gender in different ways, perhaps as gender nonconforming, but not necessarily. Genderqueer, gender identities that lie outside and in reaction to the heterosexual duality, man-woman, and to gender stereotypes are those that combine several gender identities. This term combines all willingly dissident gender identities with what may or may not be related to volatile sexual orientation. Some genderqueers may identify as transgender. Intersex, those whose sex cannot be assigned according to the biological criteria for identifying men and women. Chromosomes, appearance of genital flesh, reproductive organs, an identity chosen for those who refuse early sexual assignation through hormones and surgery, intersex children. Male to female, a trans individual in the sense boy to girl, man to woman, MTF, as above but without mentioning gender. Neither, those who identify neither as man nor as woman. Neutrosis, those who identify as genderless, see agender. Other, those whose gender identity does not lie within the binary system of sex and gender, or within a third of any other gender. O, an alternative to M or W on administrative documents. Pangender, those who refuse heteronormative binary gender which corresponds to the difference in sexuality, because they practice several or all genders, close to genderqueer. Trans, a generic term which describes transsexual and transgender individuals and those who identify as such. Trans*, a portmanteau term which allows trans people of different kinds to be grouped together. The star, sometimes replaced by an apostrophe, indicates that transsexuals and transgenders are not distinguished, close to trans. Trans * female, someone not of the feminine sex who claims to be both trans and female. Trans * male, someone not of the masculine sex who claims to be trans and masculine. Trans * man, someone not of the masculine sex who claims to be trans and man. Trans * person, someone who claims a trans identity and a gender other than his or her birth sex. Trans * woman, someone not of the feminine sex who claims to be both trans and a woman. Transgender, a term which includes those who do not wish to identify as transsexual because of the medical and pathological connotations with this term, or those who claim other gender identities which may or may not be linked to the construction of alternative sexes. Transfemale, a transfeminine individual identifying as a woman. Transmale, a transmasculine individual identifying as masculine. Transman, a transsexual or transgender individual assigned as female at birth but who identifies as a man. Transperson, any trans individual or trans individual who claims a trans identity with as much as a gender identity. Trans woman, a transsexual or transgender individual assigned as a man at birth but who identifies as a woman. Transgender female, someone with feminine gender identity who, unlike transsexuals, has undergone surgery or hormone therapy to match sex of chosen gender, or had recourse to either. Transgender male, someone with masculine gender identity who, unlike transsexuals, has not undergone surgery or hormone therapy to match sex to chosen gender, or had recourse to either. Transgender man, someone who identifies as a trans man but not transsexual. Transgender person, someone who identifies as transgender, a broader term than transsexual or transgender indicating disconnection from birth sex or biological sex. Transgender woman, someone who identifies as a trans woman but not transsexual. Transsexual, someone identifying as medically transsexual who is usually treated with hormones and surgery to bring sex, gender, and self-presentation into harmony. Transsexual female, a transsexual woman. Transsexual male, transsexual man. Transsexual person, a transsexual individual. Two-spirit, a generic term indicating men who take on a feminine identity and gender, and women who take on a masculine identity and gender among the Native Americans. This list has a surreal quality which has not been missed. It was doubtless prepared as an exhaustive list, for now, including cases which are extremely rare, imaginary, or conceived in the abstract. However, one may remark that many descriptions are of the same category. 26 for those who say they are trans, 8 for those who do not wish to be assimilated to any gender, 3 for those who claim several genders, and 3 for those who claim the gender of their biological sex. The various representatives of the LGBTQIA+ movement have found in gender theory a theoretical justification for their sexual orientations. Once the natural and essential link between gender and its biological sex is denied, the duality of gender and its normal heterosexual form in society as the basis of the couple is no longer absolute. Any freely chosen form of subjective sexuality becomes legitimate in every way and with all its consequences. E. Woke thought. Gender theory has also been taken up by woke thought, or wokeism. It was developed recently in the United States before being brought to Europe. The term woke comes from the verb to wake, to describe a state of wakefulness in the face of injustice and discrimination towards certain minorities. It was first used to react to discrimination against black people by white people and then applied to the area of gender to call for a fight against the domination of women by men. Then it was applied to the domination and exploitation of animals by mankind. In woke thought, this denomination and exploitation are systematic. All the members of every group concerned, be they whites, blacks, males, females, or human beings, are taken together and tarred with the same brush as forming a system. The alleged systematic domination by men is called the patriarchy. It is interesting to observe that this train of thought has its theoretical roots in French theory, or postmodern thought as expressed in France. It has the same roots as gender theory. They arise from the combination of 5 of its main ideas. 1. The idea developed especially by Derrida that modern language and the thought it expresses are founded upon pairs of opposed concepts, each of which draws its meaning from its difference from the other. Examples are good and evil, true and false, beautiful and ugly, man and woman, heterosexual and homosexual, man and animal. 2. According to Bourdieu, these pairs are engraved in our minds and create a social hierarchy. This leads to a domination of the first over the second. The first gains privileges, whilst against the second there is discrimination. 3. The idea that language and the thought it expresses is in fact set up by the dominant and is at their service. 4. From this arises the idea that knowledge comes from power, so that rationality and science are repudiated. They are seen as social constructs prepared by the dominant with no relation to reality. So, woke thought rejects the findings of science, and also reason and common sense, concerning the biological and physiological differences between races, between men and women, and between mankind and the animals. Once this is done, woke thought becomes an ideology. It is a closed system of thought, fortified to resist all objections which are seen as deriving from the dominant. 5. The idea that to be dominant or dominated is a systematic attribute of all those in a group. There is the imperative to end the discrimination which some suffer at the hands of others: blacks at the hands of whites, women at the hands of men, allosexuals at the hands of heterosexuals, animals at the hands of men. This supposes the end of all dualities by cancelling in each the dominant party. At a deeper level, dominant thought and its linguistic tools must be supplanted by a new mindset in language. The institutions, especially educational, and media are to be mobilized to this end. Woke thought seeks to push this through program, not only in the present and the future, but also in the past. Collective memory is to be blotted out. Literary references and monuments to those supposed to have helped to create a group which dominates another are to be effaced. This attempt to purify culture is called cancel culture. Woke thought is thus a militant movement which practices the exclusion of those it sees as dominant. Socially, it takes the form of intolerance and violence, replacing supposed inequalities and discrimination with the inversion of the same, and with new forms of discrimination. Woke thought has been examined by many critical studies, which we will not examine in detail in this work. From the start, it has been mainly about race, but where it has been applied to gender, the critical assessment of gender theory will apply to it as well. Glory be to our God. To him also be honor and dominion, always, now, and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. We pray that you were edified by today's podcast. If you would like to help in the creation of more Jordanville Readings podcasts, consider supporting us on Patreon. As a thank you to our subscribers, we also offer special discounts on our online store. Visit patreon.com/holytrinity to set up a monthly donation. May the Lord reward you for your generosity. Jordanville Readings is produced and distributed by Holy Trinity Publications in Jordanville, New York. All rights reserved. For more information about today's reading and our full list of publications, please see the show notes or visit holytrinitypublications.com. Thank you.